to our webinar on energy justice. My name is Britta Bockhorn. I am working at the ARL, the Academy for Territorial Development in the Leibniz Association. And I'm happy that we are able to have this webinar organized today together with the RSA, the Regional Studies Association. And the Regional Studies Association is the global and interdisciplinary network for urban and regional research, development, and policy. And it supports its members with latest research, funding schemes, networking and publishing opportunities, and spaces to grow research and careers. The ARL is a social research infrastructure in the Leibniz Association that enables cooperation and networking between spatial science research and planning practice. And the ARL bundles inter- and transdisciplinary knowledge on current issues of sustainable spatial development. And before we start with the webinar, some general information about the webinar. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available afterwards on the RSA Lounge. And if you don't want to be seen on the screen, please turn off your camera and make sure that your microphone is muted. Please put any questions that you have in the Q&A box or raise your virtual hands afterwards when we come to the discussion part. And if you want to tweet about the event, please use the hashtag RSA webinar if you want to do that. Well, today's webinar is part of a three-part webinar series that is called Equity in Transitions. And I'm really happy that we are able to organize this series as it recognizes that equity is essential to ensure that transitions are inclusive, that they are equitable and beneficial for all members of society. And we started in February with our first webinar that was on social housing, and today we'll continue with the topic of energy justice as another important aspect. And we invited two experts today. The first expert is Ludger Gailing. Ludger Gailing is a professor of regional planning at Brandenburg University of Technology, Cottbus-Senftenberg, a long word. And he is a member of the ARL. His research focuses on aspects of regional spatial development and planning, such as the geographies of energy transitions, debates around common goods and justice, as well as the role of transformations for the planning system. And we have a second speaker today. This is Saska Petrova. Saska Petrova is professor of human geography and departmental research director at the University of Manchester. And her research and policy activities are situated at the intersection of energy, precarity, and gender, underpinned by a wider interest in the political governance and contestation of social and environmental injustices. And we start with Ludger Gailing. A warm welcome to you, Ludger. The word is yours.
So thank you very much. And okay, so today I would like to talk about two empirical perspectives that I have on the issue of energy justice. So I will say some few words about energy justice as a concept, and then I get into these two empirical fields: wind energy development in rural areas and structural change in Lusatia. So starting with the issue of energy justice, I'll start somewhat atypically with two documents from the German government, which are intended to show a bit that justice is becoming more and more important in this phase of transformation. First, on this really recent one, it's called Shaping Transformation Together in a Just Way, and it's the German Sustainable Development Strategy, the roadmap for sustainable development in Germany. And here one particular aspect of this Deutsche Nachhaltigkeitsstrategie is now the justice dimension of sustainability. So justice seems to take center stage in shaping the transformation processes towards sustainability. And another example is the federal government's report on the equivalence of living conditions. This concept is a age-old principle of German spatial planning, which is also enshrined in the Basic Law as a spatial implementation of the principle of the welfare state. However, this report is the first time in 2024, and this also highlights this growing importance of justice issues in the transformation. So the fact that justice is playing a great role is connected to the increasing number of discussions about how the transformation is taking place. Who is being neglected? Who feels left behind? What about the differences between urban and rural areas, and so on? When it comes to talking about justice, injustice is actually most of the time the starting point. We also see this in the relevant basic literature. And we should not be surprised that unjust environments and living conditions are produced spatially. So when it comes to energy transitions and the related injustices, we talk about, for example, the distribution of wind turbines and their revenues, and the procedures. How are the procedures organized, and who can have a say? Who may benefit? For example, tenants, or yes or not, who is burdened, and what about global injustices? Where do the resources come from, and so on? So these are energy issues in the debate related to justice. So energy transitions are characterized by imbalances, by inequalities, and by injustices. We see an uneven development between spaces, a spatial differentiation, and geographical variations. We can also seek a combined development, and this perspective highlights how remnants of previous eras of production are carried over and come into conflict with the new. So this is a justice perspective is always a disequilibrium and a nonlinear perspective. And it may raise this question: how do energy spaces arise from, reproduce, or challenge broader specialities of power and justice? The debate on energy justice relates to a system that fairly disseminates both the benefits and costs of energy services, one that contributes to more representative and impartial energy decision-making. This concept is based on philosophical approaches to justice, both liberal and critical ones. It's also using the same categories, for example, like Schlossberg in his work related to environmental justice. And this results in this famous 3 dimensions of justice: distribution, procedure, and recognition. So these 3 aspects are distributional justice: where do we find just or unjust distribution of costs and benefits? How equitable is the allocation of risks and opportunities? Procedure: what about the access to decision-making power? How do procedures lead to just or unjust energy decisions? And finally, recognition: unjust distributions are the result of social processes and cultural beliefs by a majority society, and this is about recognizing differences and critically reflecting on possible dominance. This certainly applies to individuals, but can also be applied to groups and to spaces. So my first example is wind energy development in rural areas. In the course of the energy transition in Germany, but also elsewhere, over the last 20 years, new energy landscapes have emerged, particularly in rural areas. This is true in material terms, as we can see here, but of course also in social terms, with a multitude of new players, decentralized ownership structures, prosumers, cooperatives, but also protest movements. In general, in Germany, we have a very high level of the acceptance of the energy transition. But nevertheless, there is a strong and sometimes also growing rejection when it comes to wind power critiques. However, this is not the same in all regions. There is also here uneven development, as mentioned above. In some regions, there's more protest, and in some regions, there's no protest at all. We have carried, for example, we have carried out a comparative study between two neighboring regions in Germany, one in Western Germany, here on the left side, and the other in Eastern Germany on the right side, whereas in the Western region, there were a variety of initiatives from below, and there was little protest and feelings of injustice. The situation was completely different in the Eastern region. There were no regional initiatives. There was diverse protest against the colonization by external investors, and it was more or less regarded as an installation landscape. So energy transitions vary greatly from region to region, also in terms of justice. This has also been confirmed in our recent study concerning rural districts around the rather small capital of the state of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern in the northeast of Germany. There's also local value creation below average, hardly any community energy in the wind sector, and the land often does not belong to the local communities or to the local agricultural businesses. So this is why there are these feelings of being colonized here. And this is a typical example of power issues in Eastern German energy transition regions. This feeling of being colonized, this feeling of being only an installation landscape, and the feeling of not having a say here in the process. So in general, we can say there is a necessary distributive injustice with regard to the burdens of wind power expansion when it comes to the aspect that rural areas have to carry a burden here. It cannot be in wind energy development cannot be done in cities, so it's not possible to do it everywhere. But there is a question of recognitional justice. Here, especially the interests of small rural communities and their population. And procedural justice, following our research here, may be an answer. This is true for the consideration of concerns in regional planning, and this is also true for the empowerment of the small rural communities, and especially for an adequate and mandatory financial participation as a key and important aspect for justice here. I come to my second example. It's structural change in Lusatia, the region where my university in Cottbus is. Lusatia is in the southeast of Eastern Germany, and it's a region in coal phase out. We still have 2 active open cast lignite mines with corresponding power plants here. In Germany, there was a National Commission for Growth, Structural Change and Employment, and it decided that there should be a phase out, of a coal phase out until 2038. And it decided also that there should be structural funds for the coal regions. There was this law for structural change in the coal regions from August 2020. And it said that there should be 40 billions of euros until 2038 for these regions that you can see here in color in this German map. 10 billions of it for Lusatia in the state of Brandenburg. So, and it's important to know that although Lusatia is an industrialized region, it is also a rural and sparsely populated region. So this per capita funding is equivalent to one of the highest levels of regional structural policy funding ever seen in Germany. Sorry for the German content after the following slides, but it's just to show you that how this process has been done. We have here in Brandenburg the so-called Wirtschaftsregion Lausitz is a public body for the Lusatia economic region as a regional institution. And it is responsible for this so-called funding arm 1 here on the left side. And this funding arm 1 is organized within the comprehensive so-called workshop process. And this is quite open for selected civil society actors, stakeholders from the field of economic actors, and so on. In funding arm 2, on the other hand, there is the dominance of the federal and state governments in proposing and awarding projects. So they differ fundamentally in terms of procedural justice. While funding arm 2 reflects the executive branch of the federal state structure, funding arm 1 is organized more like a regional governance structure that actively aims to involve other actors beyond the state in policy formulation. When it comes to distributive justice, this map shows the distribution of funding with regard to the system of centrality. You can see Cottbus as the only regional center and the other medium-sized towns and smaller towns. We see the regional center Cottbus receives by far the most funding in both funding arms. This can certainly be described as unjust, because it is precisely in the rural parts of Lusatia that the feeling of being left behind is greatest. On the other hand, from an overarching perspective, it may well make sense to strengthen the only major city. So to accept inequality and give it an economic perspective, so that this can be subsequently lead to spillover effects. In the end, it is an open question here. We have to know that with this policy now, many mega projects are being realized in Cottbus, the most modern maintenance facility for high-speed trains with the longest haul in Germany, a very large science-oriented technology park, a brand new medical university, and so on. Everything in this city with 100,000 inhabitants in Lusatia. These projects are also largely being realized in the so-called core affected region. This is a sub-region of Lusatia that is primarily affected by the coal phase-out. When it comes to recognitional justice, there are different there's a different recognition of issues and claims behind which are different individual and collective needs in structural change processes. We can see that these workshop procedures, they are a possible instrument for just recognition. For example, the Sorbs is a national minority here in these regions. They are part of the process. Then civil society is part of the process. So there are options for recognitional justice here. Then this is a basic confirmation of the federal German tradition. As I said, equivalent, not equal living conditions, and that there should be regional funding for regions undergoing structural change. This is also an aspect of recognizing collective spatial interests through distributive justice. But there is not a systematic consideration of the core of the debates on recognition of diversity aspects. So this is an open question regarding new marginalizations within the structural change process. And there is, for example, a lack of consideration of services of public and general interest And this fits into a feminist criticism of structural change. Or there's also a criticism from a youth perspective relating the structural change process here. Especially, we have to know that the situation is now such that it is no longer a question of replacing the industrial jobs that are disappearing. Rather, we can now assume that demographic change and thus the lack of specialist staff will be the main problem in Lusatia. It would therefore be important to invest not only in business-related infrastructure and research facilities, but also in services of general and public interest, in quality of life, a welcoming culture, and so on.
You have 5 more minutes.
Yeah, no problem, because I now come to my conclusions already. And this is quite short, so that we can discuss the cases that I have shown you also in relation to the theoretical aspects that are presented before. So energy transitions and related structural change processes like the one in Lusatia, they systematically produce also spatial injustices. But justice may be a solution, and we can find in these spaces of phase in and phase out, a better distribution of benefits and burdens. We can try to find a fair and just process design, and also we have to talk about recognizing needs and requirements. From my point of view, research on justice systematically complements research on acceptance and also on conflicts. And this remains highly relevant in the next phases of the energy transition, when we can see this already in Germany when it comes to issues of heat transition, of mobility transition, of sector coupling. So justice aspects, they will get more and more important. And coal phase-out regions, they are a possible laboratory for experimenting with just solutions. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to answer your questions and to get into the dialogue with you.
Thank you very much, Ludger. We will have the discussion part after Saska's presentation, so we'll have a joint discussion after both of your presentations, and we'll now directly move over to Saska. Saska, a warm welcome also to you, and yeah, you have the word.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I really would like to thank the organizers for inviting me today to speak. And it's a real pleasure to be in Ludger's company as well. So I think in your presentation, Ludger, you actually, provided a really good basis for my presentation as well. So thank you very much for that. Today, in my presentation, first of all, by the organizers, I was asked, because Ludger was going to give these more regional perspectives of energy justice and energy injustices. I was supposed to focus on energy poverty and the household level. And partly in my presentation, I will do that, but also I will challenge the framing of energy poverty as a household issue as well. So I hope that is fine, and I will explain why. So I have some good reasons, I think, to challenge that. But my presentation today and my work in general is informed by feminist and energy geographies, and also political ecology, just to explain where I stand. So, because if there are some questions around some other disciplines and stuff, I will do my best to answer questions as well. So I will just try to move this a bit higher. Okay. So traditionally, energy poverty has been seen in terms of the domestic thermal comfort. So whether people feel comfortable in their homes, especially during the winter period, whether they have access to clean energy, whether they can pay for their energy bills. So basically, it started basically as as a discipline, or as a, it was developed as studies in the UK, and this is the kind of the triangle that we usually have, which is energy efficiency, low income, as well as energy prices. So basically, people who have low income, or households who have low incomes and live in energy inefficient houses tend to pay high energy prices or high energy bills, and that actually creates or leads to the situation of them not feeling comfortable in their own homes. Globally speaking, we still have these huge numbers in terms of access or inadequate access to electricity or clean energy. And also we have millions of people unable to keep their homes adequately warm. Again, that is one of the indicators that is very often used in energy studies. More often, or these days, more recently, other indicators have started to be used as well. So we don't talk only about energy poverty during the winter months, but more and more we talk about energy poverty during the summer months as well, especially with climate change, when the weather becomes quite hot and people do not feel comfortable in their homes because of the high temperatures. So it becomes about cooling as well. And the field actually has developed significantly since the kind of the start of the understanding and the research on fuel poverty in the UK. Nevertheless, very often or traditionally, energy poverty has been seen as a domestic issue. So that's why, for example, we talk about energy vulnerable or energy poor households. We talk about households, if there are any benefits in terms of subsidies and other benefits, then those are distributed based on whether one household is seen as an energy poor household or not. So different indicators are used in different countries to measure whether a household can be considered to be an energy poor household, or whether a household is at risk of becoming energy poor. And in that case, that kind of propensity of becoming poor, we use it in more definitions around energy vulnerability. This idea that actually everything happens in the home, it's quite static. And basically, because in some of our research that we've done, we mostly see homes as permeable, because the homes, or where your home is, for example, whether there are any green infrastructures, blue infrastructures in those cities, in those rural areas, actually can affect how you feel in your home as well. Also, it depends on many energy infrastructures, like whether there are any good connections to clean energy, whether there is any air pollution, for example. So basically, and that has been argued way before our work on energy poverty as well. For example, many colleagues who have worked on urban political ecology, like Maria Kaika and others, have actually talked about this domestic spaces or houses as being permeable, because what's outside come inside in the house, as well as what we actually use, for example, as an energy fuel, whether fuel wood or coal or clean energy, actually gets out into the environment as well. And it's not only in terms of the material exchange of infrastructures and energy flows, but it's also the household is not apolitical. Although very often in energy studies, and especially in research on energy poverty, the household tends to be seen as either, even when we talk about energy poverty, is actually outside almost of the context or the political context of where that household is. So basically, when we talk about energy poverty, or when we talk about energy injustices that take place in the home, very often they are a mirror of what actually takes place in our society, and the other way around. So the permeability is also in terms of like social, cultural, and other dynamics, especially power dynamics as well. I'm saying all of this because I'm announcing the next step, or the next part of the presentation. So basically, how we see energy poverty, or how we've seen energy poverty, is very much as a result of what is happening in the society, not only with regards to energy, but more broadly with regards to climate change, and also more broadly with regards to justice, like social justice, political, economic justice, and so on. So we've talked about this kind of almost the intersectional aspects of energy poverty as an energy injustice more broadly. And we've seen actually as energy poverty not only happening in the home, but actually energy poverty, or how we perceive, how we understand, and what we do about the situation actually happens in the institutions and centers of power. So one of the key arguments in my work, I would say, that actually energy poverty is a politically induced injustice. And in order to explain that politically induced injustice, I use the concept of precarity. And I didn't start using the concept of precarity to challenge everything that has been done previously in terms of the conceptualization of energy poverty and energy vulnerability, but actually to add to that discussion and to basically, in a way, emphasize the politically induced situation. So I would argue that actually energy poverty should be seen as an energy precarity and as a politically induced situation, because only certain populations suffer from failing social and economic networks of support and become differentially exposed to injury, violence, and death. And this is based on insights by Judith Butler and her work on vulnerability and precarity. And I kind of started using precarity because precarity is a double signifier. It does not only describe that vulnerability as a very much passive condition in which households might be, or communities, but also provides that opportunity to talk about the agency of those households and communities in a more collective manner. So in a way, it shifts the focus from individual households, individual people, onto more collective aspects of how we deal with the inadequate access to, for example, energy services, not only in the home, but in our communities, in our cities, more broadly. And here I would add one more thing, and which I, in a way, announced when I said that our homes are permeable because they don't only mirror what happens in the society, but they also exchange material, cultural, and other types of flows. So I would argue that energy poverty is a politically induced and gendered socio-ecological injustice. So two more aspects here. The first one is gendered, and I will even complicate that one a bit more, and the socio-ecological injustice. So why is it gendered? This is basically the last report in which there were kind of like whole sections almost, which were more around climate change and even energy with regards to gender. And this is the Gender Equality Index, which is basically produced by the European Institute for Gender Equality, and the link is provided there. This one is from 2023, because there is more data in terms of energy and climate change with regards to gender, I think, in that report, rather in the new report from 2024, where there is also a bit on violence, and especially in terms of like environmental violence and stuff like that. But this one, actually, I found some interesting points that were made in the report. So, of course, it's not surprising to say that energy injustices are gendered injustices, because, of course, in our societies, we have pay gaps, if we have pension gaps, if we have health gaps, of course, there are going to be all these other gaps as well that are gendered. Nevertheless, the energy sector traditionally has been seen as a very masculine sector as well. So, for example, Ludger talked about the coal industry. The coal industry, of course, this kind of what Kara Daggett calls like these petromasculinities, but they are not only petromasculinities. We see it also with regards to renewable energy as well. There is still that kind of renewable energy masculinities as well. The sector is still very much gendered, and that's in terms of it's a systemic thing, and it's about the opportunities to be more inclusive. It's about the opportunities, to actually develop a career in the energy sector, not only to be employed in the energy sector, but to develop a career in the energy sector. And also, it's in terms of climate change as well. We have studies that have shown that actually climate change, especially in terms of decision making, for example, procedural justice, what you've talked about, Ludger, and for example, distributional justice as well, recognition, the justice of recognition as well is very much gendered. And I've provided some points from the report here that some people might find them useful. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to go back to this and talk about it. I have to apologize for the shameless self-promotion. I'm just not promoting the work that I've done with colleagues, but also just to show that we have done some studies in terms of gender in Europe, in many parts of Europe, Eastern Europe, the UK, South Europe, like in Greece, but also in places such as China. And there again, we can still see that actually that dynamic, those injustices are very much gendered. And if anybody is interested in hearing or learning a bit more about this work, we can go back to some of these points. And I said at the beginning, when I said that energy poverty is not only a gendered injustice, but I'm going to complicate that a bit more. And the problem is that whenever we are in the time of crisis, and let's be honest, we haven't even left the time of crisis for quite a while. So these days we talk about the conjuncture of crisis, the geopolitical energy crisis, the geopolitical, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have the climate change, we have the economic crisis. In many places, like in the UK, we still talk about austerity regimes and austerity policies and governance. And whenever there is a point or a time of crisis, these inequalities or these injustices that I have mentioned before, they tend to be even stronger. They tend to become again in the focus of many debates as well, because people from marginalized communities tend to suffer even more in the time of crisis. So now the question is, if that's the case, and if we are still faced by these multiple crises, how are we going to deal with those, with the processes of marginalization? Because all energy transitions, green energy transitions, they can either rectify some of the existing injustices, or they can reproduce and even emphasize further those existing injustices. So this is just some points from the Women's Budget Group report. And this was just in the time of another crisis, which was the COVID pandemic. So a 2019 study by the Young Women's Trust, for example, found that 1 in 4 young mothers were skipping meals every day in order to manage their family budget. And compared to white women and white men, Black, Asian, and minority ethnic women earn less, are less likely to be in paid work, and of course, more likely to basically be affected by the multiple crises.
I've got 5 more minutes.
Great. And this is the moment, and this was basically the reason why I got more and more interested in actually unpacking the kind of the dynamic of these multiple crises, and especially the dynamics in terms of like new energy developments. And one of the regions that has been actually presented as almost the El Dorado for new renewable energy is the Western Balkans. So this is only a map of the Western Balkans for with over 3,000 new small hydropower plants plan for the region. And this is not only, it's not only that. Solar farms have been mushrooming, wind farms have been mushrooming in the region. There has been a lot of investments, and the countries, the governments in these 6 countries daily almost announce billions of investments in green energy. And at the same time, this is the region with some of the highest rates of energy poverty. So that was one of the reasons why I got really much interest, and because I come from the region as well, so I have that attachment as well. But it was also interesting to see how the protest against the way, not against the green energy transitions, because of course the idea that actually they are green energy transitions is not bad at all. We all want to transition towards that decarbonized energy futures. The problem is the way in which these investments have materialized in the region. So there have been many protests, again, many new green energy developments, and basically these protests have been very, not only gender, but intersectional as well, because people, I mean, from in the Western Balkans, many people from different countries came together and different ethnicities to actually fight against some of those green developments. Many activists were prosecuted as a result of their activities in the region. And there again, there was that agency of these activists. So instead of being silenced, they actually came together. Activists from all across the region came together to help each other to know how to actually get information about these new developments and how to, for example, resist some of the new developments if they don't actually respect those let's say, aspects of procedural justice or justice of recognition or distribution. And here, this is, I think, the last slide is basically all of this kind of research I have brought together in my new UKRI ERC consolidated project, which is the Generate project, and in which we really would like to explore this kind of dynamics, what happens when you have intense green energy developments, what happens with aspects such as like energy poverty, the intersectional aspects of energy injustices, and to see what is the dynamic in terms of like beyond the 3 traditional binaries, private versus public, collective versus individual, and vulnerable versus resilient. So we offer this kind of socio-ecological reproduction and energy precarity to explore some of those aspects as part of the ecofeminist energy framework that we are using. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Saska, also for your really interesting presentation. And I think both presentations complemented each other very, very well. Was really interesting to follow. And also to have all these different aspects and facets of energy justice mentioned here in very short but very well organized presentations. And now I already see at least one hand, and you're all now allowed to raise your virtual hands and pose questions to Saska and Ludger. And we start with Junior Mangala.
Yes, thank you very much.
Maybe you can introduce yourself briefly before you pose your questions. Just say where you come from, from which institution.
Sure. Yeah, thank you very much for giving me the floor. So my name is Junior. So I'm a PhD student at the University of Oxford, and I am from Belgium. So in my current research, I'm working on energy poverty, and my PhD project is based on energy poverty and, let's say, how energy communities can sort of help to reduce energy poverty. So I would love to thank the 2 speakers for those 2 very interesting presentations. And my question is more for Professor Saska Petrova. First of all, thank you very much for your research at the University of Manchester, because I've been reading lots of your papers, and all of those are definitely very helpful for my PhD research. So thank you very much. I came across lots of your papers recently, so thank you for that. And my question is more like, you seem to say energy poverty is very systemic and gendered oriented, and I do agree with you. What I try to do is to conduct a sort of social network analysis of energy communities to understand what are the different dimensions behind energy poverty. And I was wondering, I wanted to ask you, what kind of social indicators do you think I should prioritize when I'm looking at a social network analysis of energy communities to alleviate energy poverty? So you mentioned the gender, but I was wondering what sort of other social aspect I should prioritize, because usually when we think about energy poverty, we think about energy prices, we think about low income, we think about energy or poor energy efficiency. But rather than those three aggregates, what are the other sort of social indicators you can think about when it comes to energy poverty? Thank you.
Sorry, can I answer the question? Okay, thank you. Junior, thank you so much for the question. That is a great question, and it reflects some of the current challenges that we have with energy communities. Energy communities, traditionally have been seen almost as a middle class project, which started as a good idea, of course, and I'm all for energy communities, but energy poverty and energy communities were not seen as one thing for a long time. So energy communities were seen more from the kind of green energy transitions aspects, in terms of energy justice, in terms of the decentralization of energy systems, communities. Very often, many analyses have shown that the community concept or the community term in energy communities sometimes is missing, because they have also been used for different business opportunities and so on. So for many, I would say, noble aims and purposes, but not very often for energy poverty. And there is this new trend now, and we've seen so many new projects in which actually researchers, professionals, experts have tried, and as well as local governments have tried to include energy poverty in energy communities. I'm involved in a project which is called Power Up, and the main aim of the project was in 6 countries in Europe to find a way how energy communities can include or can address energy poverty in those cities that are included in the project. It's not an easy thing, because of course these energy communities, they are on the energy market. So the competition, especially when it comes from the fossil energy sector, is quite fierce. When they're small, they're almost like invisible, and fossil energy sector is not that much interested. But when they become like really visible players in the energy market, then it becomes a problem. So they have to actually deal with the competition from this well-developed, hugely subsidized fossil energy sector, and at the same time address one of the biggest challenges, which is energy poverty. So in some of these projects, what we've tried to do is how local governments, like municipalities, city councils, can actually help what they considered, or like the households that they considered to be energy poor, to become shareholders in energy communities. So basically, in some of the projects, we talked about alternative business, sustainable energy models. So what they did, or some of the indicators that we used, is how many energy poor households, like as registered by the municipality, are included as shareholders. Do energy communities have any social funds? So for example, in terms of giving back to the community, not only to their shareholders, but to the community. We've also talked in terms of like, because some of them also have this corporate responsibility in a way, although in many cases that is not required from energy communities, but still, for example, in terms of like what kinds of projects they have supported in the community. We've also checked the structure of energy communities. So for example, is there like any, let's say, diversity, or like in the UK, I mean, in every country is different, but in the UK, we have this equality, diversity, like the EDI, some of the indicators, whether there is any diversity. So some of those aspects can be taken into consideration, who is in charge, but even if they include energy vulnerable households, how do they engage with them? Are they included in the decision-making process? Because that is very new for energy communities as well. Because one of the poverty stuff is not even about the economic or anything, it's the time poverty as well. And we talk about gender and the role of, you know, all that care that we have, it's been used in many of the, that feminist actually researchers have talked a lot for decades. You know, there is a lot of care, there is like dependent members of the households. So where to find the time to become active members of energy communities? Hopefully this is helpful.
Yeah, this is super helpful. Thank you very much for all of this. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I see another hand raised by Heike Köckler.
Yes, hello. My name is Heike Köckler. I'm professor on place and health in Germany. And I have a question to both of you, to Ludger and Saska. First of all, thanks for your very interesting presentations. I have a focus in my work pretty much on environmental injustice from a procedural and from a distributional, but also from an outcome justice perspective. And as an urban planner, I'm always thinking about what to do as urban planner or as regional planner, so a spatial planner. And I guess that you also think about this. So do you have any kinds of requirements to regional planning, maybe more on Ludger's side or on local planning from Saska's side? So what should planners do different? Do we need different laws? Do we need different habits to realize procedural justice and energy decision making? So do you have any clues on that? Would be interested in. Thank you.
Maybe some short answers, or try to keep it short to be able to have more questions from the audience later on. Starting with Ludger.
Okay. Yeah, as I said, when it comes to wind energy development, we detected that that there should be better procedures and that there should be more participation, also financial participation. It should be it should be obliged that there is a financial participation when it comes to developing renewable energy projects, and it should be done in a way that these rural communities can use the resources for their own purposes, because until now, especially in the areas where we did our research, there is not so much capital on the ground, also social capital, for example. And so, yeah, we need processes in order to give the people the opportunity to have the profits from the renewable energy projects. And this is also a question of empowerment here, because rural communities, especially in Eastern Germany, they are left alone a little bit with these processes. And we need institutions that do this empowerment. We do not have them until now. Small rural communities, they need empowerment. And this is a main idea of having better procedures. here. And another issue when it comes to structural change process in these areas where coal phase out plays a role. I mean, we have 10 billions of euros here in Lusatia, and many things could be done with this money. Until now, it's about large projects for replacing the jobs that were lost in the coal sector. Okay, but this work now is done. And now we could use this money for processes for the people living in the region, and also for the people that should come into the region. As I said, in areas of enhancing the services, the public services, public infrastructures, quality of life for the people, and also the necessary welcoming culture, which is a specific problem in Lusatia, with right-wing populists play an important role here. So yeah, I mean, this would totally change the idea of structural change policy and give it a more comprehensive perspective, which then also may include the perspectives that Saska talked about, a more gendered perspective, a more intersectional perspective, and so on. And in the end, a perspective that is more taking into account issues of recognition of justice. Yeah.
Okay. Saska, do you want to add something to Ludger's answer?
I think he explained that really well, and plus there is another question for Ludger. So yeah.
Okay, then I'll read out the question from Maria Giovanna Bosco for Ludger. EU legislation introduced the concept of suitable areas for national and local governments to find those areas where to develop renewable energy plants. When can we say that these areas are being sacrificed in the name of burden sharing, and which type of energy injustice is more likely to be observed in this case? Thank you very much for the interesting presentation.
Yeah, really good and difficult question. I mean, we also have in Germany now for 2 years a new paradigm in planning. This is also now strongly related to this EU legislation, where the acceleration of renewable energy development plays an important role. And then it's getting even more complicated, right? Because I talked about just development and talking about justice perspectives, and then it's accelerated. And we do not have the time to develop good procedures and to develop a fair burden sharing and so on. But I think this is a situation where we are in, right? Because we need the renewable energy development, and at the same time, we cannot do it without a society that has the feeling that this is a just and fair process. So I think these are the two parts of it, and we have to do. We always have to deal with both issues, and an accelerated renewable energy development for climate meeting the climate targets here, and on the other hand, it has to be done in a way that is just and fair, in order not to have more conflicts on the ground, because we will have these conflicts. We have them already, and we have to think about these ways of not having these conflicts here. So this is a really good question it fits perfectly to what's happening right now and what the situation is, I think, in many countries in Europe right now. Thank you very much for the question.
Yeah, We are running out of time, but I can see one more hand raised, and I'd like to give Luca Bizerna the word for a very short question and a short answer, please.
Thank you. Sorry for this last question. Thank you everyone for the interesting webinar. I had a last question for Saska Petrova. Well, first of all, I am committed in my PhD project in the analysis of energy vulnerability in Southern Europe. And I also took a lot of the inspiration from your work and from the work of your colleague Stefan Budzarowski. And also the gender perspective is really important because it's the difference are really relevant when you observe the data. And in this respect, I did a research on the Italian municipal level of energy vulnerability, and besides the gender, well, the increased vulnerability of women, respectively to the indicators of unemployment and lone parenthood. There is also an interesting aspect outside, we can say, the demographic sphere, that is on the infrastructural level, because, for example, I used electricity interruptions as a proxy for energy infrastructural energy inefficiency, and the Italian peninsula is basically divided in two. In the north, there is a more characterization of demographical vulnerabilities, but in the south and in the center south, the infrastructural inefficiency is the most characterizing factor related to energy vulnerability. So what I wanted to ask you is if this infrastructural aspect is somewhat the manifestation of the, as you said before, the political sphere of energy poverty, and how, in your opinion and in your research work, can change across countries, because we know that we have really different infrastructural configurations according to the countries. So thank you, and sorry for the loss of time.
Thank you. May I?
Yeah, Saska, you may quickly.
Thank you. That's a $1 million question, Luca. It's a great question. Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, even the kind of the division, that kind of regional inequalities, and Ludger actually addressed that in his presentation as well, are very much political, aren't they? So again, those energy, like the electricity interruptions, like the interruption in the grid as well, they are a reflection of that, political contract, or, political development in terms of like, and energy is part of it, okay? Energy is always political, because we talk a lot about big finances, big investments. It is very political. So I'm not sure how to solve that. I'm not a politician, but it is interesting to see, for example, in which areas there are more, for example, interruptions. There are more like blackouts. For how long? It would be interesting, because I think as a geographer, so for me, a map, it can be a good starting point. So just to see where exactly, who is affected and how, for how long, I think something like that can give you some interesting starting points. It might seem that it's not demographic, but I mean, there is demographic diversity everywhere, I would say.
Okay, thank you very much.
you.
We've already exceeded our hour, so we have to come to an end, unfortunately. I see that there are more hands raised and more questions in the chat box, but we have to stop here, unfortunately. But thank you very much, Saska and Ludger, for your really nice presentations, and also for all participants for your questions and for participating in this webinar. And we have a last and third webinar on the 15th of April at the same time as today's webinar, and it will be on urban planning for health equity. And I'd be happy to see many of you there as well. And yeah, until then, have a good weekend ahead. Goodbye.